Welcome to our 2021 commemoration of the Holocaust, coming to you from Llandudno in North Wales. 20 years ago, the British government chose 27th of January, the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz by the Russian Red Army, as the day to remember the Holocaust. Here in Llandudno, we began our annual services of remembrance in 2008, and they have grown in support every year since. This year, for the first time, we are having an online commemoration, which I hope you will find just as meaningful as a physical meeting together. We will begin by lighting 6 memorial candles, remembering that more than 6 million Jewish people lost their lives in the Nazi Holocaust. If you would like to join us in this simple ceremony, please make sure that your candle is in a safe, stable place and take care as you light it. And please do not leave the candle burning if you have to leave the room. So, let's watch the 6 candles being lit. Our first speaker is the government's independent advisor on anti-Semitism. From 2001 to 2019, John Mann was the Member of Parliament for the constituency of Bassetlaw in Nottinghamshire. During most of that period, he was also chairman of the all-party parliamentary group against anti-Semitism, who published a number of different reports and inquiries. In July 2019, he was appointed the government's independent advisor on anti-Semitism by former Prime Minister Theresa May. This became a full-time job from September that year, when John was granted a life peerage as Lord Mann of Holbeck Moor in the city of Leeds. We are very grateful to John for including us in his busy schedule and recording this address.
Hello, I'm John Mann, Lord Mann of Holbeck Moor. I'm the government's advisor on anti-Semitism, and I'm delighted to share in your event today. And in doing so, I reflect back 40 years, even longer. I was aged 18 on a tour of Europe with one of my mates, going from city to city, tourist location to tourist location. And we went to Munich. And one afternoon we took a train out to Dachau. I learned a lot. We did the tour, saw the accommodation, the photos, the history, the graffiti carved into the accommodation. And as we left, in English, on the final door was a sign, and it said, Dachau was only a waiting camp. It had a profound impact on me. The scale of what happened in those times, the stories that have never been told by those who couldn't tell them. And we all have a responsibility to learn from history. History repeats itself. The Holocaust didn't come from nowhere. It wasn't an aberration in the sense that it just emerged for no reason. It came from centuries of hatred, of a failure to challenge that hatred, of a building up of a memory that was full of hatred and falsehood that created the Nazi ideology. In remembering these events, we need to ensure that we today are playing our role in understanding history, in telling history, in challenging what goes on in our society, in our country, in our town, in our street, in our organisations. Not just in the past, but today and again tomorrow. You know, we all have a choice. We can fail to challenge ourselves, our own prejudices, our own bias, our own assumptions. Or we can be bold enough to do that. But then together we can choose. Are we to be bystanders? Or will we call out hatred when we see it? Will we challenge it? Do we speak out? It's my belief that our responsibility first and foremost is to ourselves, to who we are, to where we come from, to where we live. So my family, my village, my area, my political party, my backyard. That's always been my primary responsibility. For if I'm not prepared to do that, then why should anybody else? And then, and in the wider role I have now in advising government and indeed other political parties and beyond the political parties, to say that we must also challenge what goes on in our society. What I want to see, what I attempt to do, is ensure that we have a consistency of approach. Always consistency. At all times, in all places. Be it in Parliament, be it in your town, in your area. But also that we create consequences for those who fail to learn by their prejudice. Anybody can say something stupid, something prejudiced, something racist. Anybody. Everybody. The question is, when challenged, will they learn from it? Will they listen? And who should make that judgment? It has to be those on the receiving end. The kind of country that I want to live in, that I expect for my family now and in the future, is a country where everyone has equal rights. And therefore, that the British Jewish community, old, young, has the opportunity to be themselves without any impingement. So I want for every young Jewish person, every Jewish teenager in particular, them to know that in this country they will be free to do whatever they're capable of doing, to go wherever they want, to study however they want, to work however they choose, without anybody impinging on their rights to define who they are, to be themselves. That is the standard that I have set for government. And anything beneath that will require my attention and others, and it will require challenging and action. Stories of those who survived are a lesson in history, in truth, for all of us. But there will come a time in the not too distant future when those stories are not in person. The reality of life is that they will be in DVDs, second hand, third hand, in books. History and the telling of it is our responsibility. And the way that we tell history is by challenging what goes on today to ensure that history will not repeat itself. One other message for you that I think is vital, and this is to each and every one of you. People underestimate their own power. They underestimate their own influence. I'm calling on nobody to do vast amounts. I'm calling on nobody to do things that are remarkable, earth-shattering. No. I'm calling on you to keep doing what you're doing. And I say thank you for it. But I'm asking you to do that little bit more. It's what I ask of every politician in Westminster, in municipalities across the world. Do your little bit. You're already doing your little bit. So my plea to you is just do that little bit more, that extra 5%. The letter, the email that you write, challenging hatred in our country. The time that you speak out once more, an additional time. Never ever underestimate the power of that. Because when you add up all those little bits, it's a huge bit. It's more than a bit. If we all do our little bit, then we win. The lesson of history is that we all have a responsibility just to do that little bit. Thank you for what you are doing. Never underestimate the power of what you do. Keep on doing it. Thank you for this opportunity to share in this most important of events, at this most important of all commemorations. I stand with you. Thank you.
Lord Mann has given us much to think about in that address. Although we are here to commemorate the worst act of anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, it was by no means the final act. Let's take on board what has just been said and each of us do just a little bit more to counteract the world's oldest hatred. As we think on these things, we're going to listen to a rendering of Kalon Lan by the Fron male voice choir, accompanied by soloist Cerys Matthews. Kalon Lan is Welsh for pure heart, which I suggest to you is a good antidote of anti-Semitism. The choir is based in the village of Fron, close to an amazing aqueduct, which you can see behind me. We're very grateful to the Fron choir for allowing us to use this recording. After Calon Lan, we shall hear the Welsh national anthem, which we would normally sing at the end of our annual commemoration. However, with this year's event going out online, we felt it more appropriate to have the British national anthem at the end, so we've included the Welsh one as part of this musical interlude. The words will come up on screen if you wish to join in, together with the English translation. Calon Lan. Our second speaker is Manfred Goldberg, B.E.M. The story of his experience living in Nazi Germany has been provided to us by the Holocaust Educational Trust, established in 1988 to educate people from every background about the Holocaust and the important lessons to be learned for today. Manfred's testimony was recorded back in 2017 when he was a mere 86 years old. I'm sure you will find it a very moving story.
I was born in Germany, a small town of 250,000 inhabitants, of whom around 5,000 were Jewish. I started going to school there until in late 1938 the Germans expelled all Jewish children from school, so there was no more schooling for Jewish children after that time. In December 1941 we were deported, that is 1,000 Jews, 1,000 of the 5,000 Jews who lived in that town of Kassel were rounded up, put on a train and sent to an unknown destination. We traveled for 3 days and found ourselves in a town called Riga, which is the capital city of Latvia, more than 1,000 miles from the town I was taken from. And we spent 1.5 years in this ghetto of Riga, which was effectively a labor camp. There were no factories inside the camp, but people were organized into working groups of slave labor and marched out of the camp to work for the Germans in factories all day and marched back into the camp at night. In this camp of Riga, small children were not required to work. So I and the younger brother, who was 4 years younger than I was 11 when I was taken there, he was 7. We stayed in the camp all day. I had to look after him until in the evening my mother would come back and she would take care of us. We were there for 18 months. We were then sent to another camp, this time in cattle trucks, a 2-day journey to a smaller labor camp, which was purpose-built, just barracks with sort of multi-layer bunk beds, 3 high. And again, people were sent out to work. In this camp, I was now 13 years old. I was considered old enough to work, but my younger brother was allowed to stay in the camp together with 3 or 4 other small children. I, on the other hand, had to go out and do a full day's work. We had been in the camp no more than about 4 weeks when we came home from work one evening and found that these 4 small children who were left in the camps had disappeared. We were told by the kitchen staff that during the day a couple of SS men had turned up in a vehicle, said they had orders to pick up these children and taken them. And from that day on they have disappeared without trace. We have absolutely, we can surmise, but we have no idea, excuse me, of what happened to these children. We have searched for more than 70 years through various organizations who have access to records. The Germans, as a rule, were very methodical in keeping records of people, even those they murdered. Many people have found out the actual dates on which their parents or cousins or uncles were murdered, because the Germans actually did keep record. But for my little brother, we have not found any trace whatever. We surmise that they were taken away and quietly killed. Since we've done everything possible for ever since our liberation, unsuccessfully, not a trace has been found. From this second camp, we were sent to Stutthof. In this camp, we worked for almost all the time we were in the camp on what you may consider a strange activity. The Allies had decided that they could cause major harm to the German war effort by bombing the German railway system. So they bombed it intensely. And we, a group of about 300 of us, were taken daily to spots on the railway system which had been bombed, and we were told to repair. We had to rip up the bombed section of the railway track, bring the required new rails, new sleepers, etc., bed it all down and repair, of course, all under German guard and all under pressure to do it as quickly as possible, because the Germans needed to have that track working again in order to supply their frontline troops. And it was possibly the skill we acquired which helped us to survive, because when we were sent to Stutthof, which by now had become more or less an extermination camp, we were told that our group of 300 were in Stutthof only in transit. We were being sent to another labor camp where we would continue the work in which we had become fairly skilled, i.e. repairing, because the bomb damage to the railway system was spread over a large part of Germany, wherever the Allies thought the lines were being used for supplying German war effort, German troops, they would bomb. So this next camp we were sent to was a camp called Stolp, which was located near an extremely busy railway junction, and our group of 300 were put to work repairing the bomb-damaged lines again. And as we repaired them, they or nearby were damaged again, so there was non-stop work for us. Except, of course, we were being starved. When I say starved, I mean food was uppermost in our minds from the moment we woke until we went to bed. In the mornings, we were given a cup of some warm substitute coffee and a little chunk of bread, and that was it for the day. In the evening, if we were lucky, we had been given a tin can. We had to line up. At the end of the front of the line, there would be sort of a large pot of some stew, mainly coloured water, but if you were lucky, you'd manage to get a scrap of potato or carrot floating around in it. And as you reached the front of the queue, you had to give your number. Names were non-existent in the camps. Each one of us were given a number right at the beginning of our in the Riga ghetto, and that number remained with us through 3.5 years in the camps. 56478 was my number. I remember it to this day. As you reached the front, you said 56478, and you were given a ladle full of this broth, and that was your food for the day. Because it was such a busy railway junction, there was a lot of rail traffic, remarkably busy. Trains were coming in, being shunted, wagons decoupled, coupled onto other trains. There was a lot of activity. And we heard on the grapevine, there was a rumor that some of these wagons contained food, but they were all locked. And the Germans issued a warning: if these wagons are interfered with, the penalty is death. Nevertheless, one evening, some men, not I was still a child, but some men actually broke into one of these and stole some food. The Germans decided they had to make an example of this. They entered the camp. I'm not sure whether they found the culprits, but they took away 8 men who they said were the culprits. And these men disappeared for some time. But what happened was that in the middle of the camp, they erected an enormous gallows with 8 nooses. And one day we were all stopped from going to work. We had to assemble around this large gallows, and we had to watch these 8 men being hanged one by one. And in fact, they went even further than that. They made German guards with rifles over their shoulder mingle among us and if they caught anyone closing their eyes or looking away, you were rifle butted and warned, unless you keep your eyes on this spectacle, you'll be next. In the second camp, where my little brother disappeared, just a month or so before we were sent to Stutthof, there was what was called a selection. I don't know whether you know what a selection means. It means that on that day, no one is allowed to go to work. We all had to line up, enter a large hall. In this case, I've had previous selections where we just entered the hall and that was it. In this hall, as we entered, we were told to strip naked. And then in our naked state, both men and women had to shuffle forward in single file to the far end of a large hall, at the end of which sat an SS officer on a raised podium, holding what appeared to be sort of a conductor's baton in his hand. And we each had to shuffle forward, stand to attention before him. He would look each one of us up and down, and then usually without saying a word, point left or right, live or die. As I was shuffling down towards the front, there was a man standing next to me, much older than I, and I don't know what motivated him, but he bent down and whispered to me, "If he asks you your age, say you're 17. And of course I had that in mind, and quite remarkably, although in 9 cases out of 10, he would not say a word and just point his baton either way, as I stood before him, he actually asked me, "How old are you?" And of course, I answered as I had been told to. I said, "I'm 17. And he pointed me in the direction of those allowed to live. I'll never know whether, had I answered 14, I might have been pointed the other way. I was always fairly big and well built for my age. That possibly had something to do with it, or possibly the 17 registered with him. And he said, well, there's a potentially sound slave laborer there, and he pointed me in the direction of those allowed to live. Strangely, I mean, it's obviously generates the feelings of revulsion, something you just cannot imagine or take in. But the will to live is extraordinarily strong, even under these conditions. And the way I went through my period in the camps was each morning trying to do my best to still be alive that evening. You couldn't plan ahead. You couldn't allow things to get at you emotionally. The secret was to stay anonymous, not to be noticed, if you could possibly manage that.
And you haven't been back at all?
I have never been back anywhere. I have been in 6 different camps. Some of them were small labor camps. They have disappeared without trace. I wouldn't be able to find them again. They were purpose-built barracks. They were dismantled at the end of the war, and they just don't exist. There is no trace. But the larger camps, I have never been back. I've not set foot in Germany since I came to England. To many people, both youngsters and adults, the Holocaust is just something that happened. People don't really think too deeply about it. It's something that happened to other people. Well, okay, they're tough. They probably suffered, but things happen in this world which we don't like, and that was one of them. And I know from experience that when you address a group of school students, it has a remarkable effect on them. I've had responses, letters written to me, which make it clear that history lessons on the Holocaust are dull and not terribly interesting, but listening to an account given by a survivor in the first person has a remarkable effect on people. And many of the letters tell me that they will not forget what they heard from me for the rest of their lives. And secondly, I think it is important to do what we can. This is only a drop in the ocean each one of us can do, but maybe collectively we will have a little success. We cannot leave the field free to Holocaust deniers. It is quite remarkable that Holocaust denial has become a thriving industry. There are hundreds of people around, and the social sites, in some ways, have to take a lot of blame for not stopping them, publicizing their extraordinary, distorted views.
Both of Manfred's parents survived the Holocaust, and he was eventually reunited with them in Britain after the war. Since making that video, Manfred has returned to his former hometown in Germany, where he laid memorial stumbling stones, or Stolperstein, for his family on Müllerstrasse in Kassel. There are more than 70,000 such stones, 10 centimetre square concrete cubes bearing brass plates inscribed with the names and life dates of victims of Nazi persecution. His brother's plaque reads, "Here lived Hermann Goldberg, deported 1941, Riga, murdered." Having laid the stones, Manfred made a short speech before a small crowd. He then sang El Malay Rachamim for his murdered brother. He has also returned to the site of the concentration camp from which he was eventually liberated, Stutthof. This photograph shows Manfred with another Holocaust survivor, Ziggy Schipper, when they met the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge at the site in 2018. We now invite you to join in the singing of Psalm 23, "The Lord's my Shepherd." This will be led by Sian Asbridge, a member of our local Holocaust committee here in North Wales, accompanied also by her husband Paul. The words will be appearing on screen together with film of some of our local sheep. very grateful for the involvement of the Jewish community in our commemoration of the Holocaust, and will now hear two prayers. The first is El Malay Rachamim, which will be sung by cantor Michael Isdale of the South Manchester Bowden Synagogue. He will be followed by Rabbi Amir Elituv from Sha'arei Tzedek Synagogue in Hale, also in South Manchester. Rabbi Amir will first explain the relevance of El Malay Rachamim and Kaddish, and then recite the Kaddish. Both the prayers will be in Hebrew, with an English translation on screen.
El Malay Rachamim Shochein B'Meramim Hametzehem Nocha Nechona Al Kanfei Hashechina B'malachos Kedoshim Uteharim Kezarakia Mehirinu Mazirim Esenishmos Hakadoshim Yataharim Shehomso Shenegu Veshenishchatu Veshenisrafu Veshenitbayu Veshenechku Al Kiddush Hashem Be'Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, Treblinka, Majdanek ובכל שהמחנות ההשמדות בעבור שאנו מתפללים לעילוי נשמותיהם בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם לכם ברחמים יסירם בצדק כנפיו לעולמים ויצרר החיים את נשמותיהם אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם ונאמר Amen.
El Malay Rachamim. The prayer for those who have passed away is a prayer asking God to look after the souls of the deceased. We say that they are residing under the wings of the Almighty, but what it also refers to is how God lifts those souls not only under his wings, but in a sense like an eagle above the wings, that those souls go higher and higher in their ascent to eternal peace and eternal bliss. We also say the Kaddish. The Kaddish is a prayer which praises God, and essentially at this most difficult time, when we reflect upon those who have passed away, it is often a time that we do not praise God and we question God, and that is perfectly fine. But we understand that God is behind everything, and even at times when we don't understand, God has a reason that is sometimes unfathomable for us. As those who believe, we will question, but know that we will have no answer, but put our faith in God. I'm now going to recite the Kaddish. Yitgadal ve'yitkadash shemeh Rabbi. Be'alma divrach chiruteh ve'yamlich malchuteh. B'chayechon uvyomechon ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהא שמי רבה מברך, לעלם, לעלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם, ויתנשא ויתהדר, ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה, ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהא שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו amen.
2 months ago, we learned with great sadness of the passing of the former Chief Rabbi, Lord Jonathan Sacks, of blessed memory. My wife and I had the privilege of meeting him several years ago, and I know that his words were hugely beneficial to countless people throughout the world, of whatever religion or none. In memory of Lord Sacks, and with the permission of his office, we are now going to screen a short address that he brought on Holocaust Memorial Day just 1 year ago, commemorating the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz.
Time and again, the Bible uses the word zachor, remember. And that's what we do today on International Holocaust Memorial Day. We remember the victims of the Holocaust, as well as other victims of other tragedies human beings have inflicted on one another. Why is it important to remember? Because memory of the evils of the past is the best way of avoiding evils in the future. We can't bring the dead back to life, but we can ensure that they didn't die in vain. Those who forget may repeat. Those who remember know that we have to find another way. One of the greatest privileges of my life has been coming to know Holocaust survivors. Most of them lost their families, and so they became a family to one another. They helped one another live through the trauma, the loss of all they knew and loved. They'd walked, each one of them, through the valley of the shadow of death. Yet never have I met people with such a tenacious hold on life. What I found most moving was the way in recent years they've shared their memories with others, especially with young people, the builders of our future. I can hardly begin to understand the courage it takes to relive the pain of those nightmare years. Yet they've done so not in hate or bitterness or anger, but the opposite. What they've wanted to say is, don't take freedom for granted, cherish it. Don't take prejudice for granted, challenge it. Don't stand by in the face of violence and hate. Defend the defenseless and show them they're not alone. Evil happens when people let it happen, and our best defense against it is never to forget where evil leads. That's why International Holocaust Memorial Day was established, and why today, 75 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, we remember what once was, and pray for the strength to ensure that never may such things happen again.
For the past 3 years, I have brought a coachload of South Manchester WITSO members to join the Christian Friends of Israel in Llandudno for their Holocaust Memorial Service. By the wonders of technology, we were able to join together again for this important commemoration. It is my privilege to thank all the participants tonight. Firstly, Lord Mann. Your tireless work in combating anti-Semitism by advising government and other statutory bodies is so appreciated by us all. and your message tonight was truly inspirational. We're so fortunate to still have in our communities the survivors of the Holocaust. Tonight we heard the moving testimony of Manfred Goldberg, whose suffering over so many years cannot be imagined. Yet he has dedicated his life to talking of his experience so that the Shoah will never be forgotten. We owe it to him to perpetuate his story and that of so many others, and we thank him for being with us tonight and wish him well. We have heard some moving music tonight, and I want to thank the Fron male voice choir and Sean Asbridge and her husband Paul for their beautiful singing and participation in this service. For the memorial prayers, we are indebted to Rabbi Amir Elituv and Chazan Michael Isdale for joining us and for their moving contribution. This service in the time of COVID would not have taken place had it not been for the dedication and efforts of Roy Hurley, who has managed to navigate the technology and bring this wonderful service to us tonight. His wife Jackie has been the power behind the throne and also behind the camera, and we thank them and all the committee sincerely for their sterling work on behalf of the Christian Friends of Israel. I look forward to returning next year with my friends to Llandudno and to the Emmanuel Christian Centre to commemorate Holocaust Memorial Day in the usual way. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your kind words, Barbara. I have actually enjoyed learning how to edit videos and discovering a little about YouTube whilst making this video. As we draw towards the close of our time together, we are next going to enjoy the singing of the British and Israeli national anthems. This recording was made here at the Royal Albert Hall in London in 2017, when several thousand people, including many Christians and Jews, joined together to celebrate the centenary of the Balfour Declaration. Those there will remember what a wonderful occasion that was. Please join in the singing if you can. The words of both anthems will be shown on screen. After the anthems, there are just a couple of things left for me to say before we conclude. The singing of Hatikvah brings us almost to the end of this commemoration. In past years, those present have asked us how they can make a donation to help Holocaust survivors. This slide shows two ways in which you can do that. The Holocaust Educational Trust is in touch with many survivors in Britain, helping them and recording their testimonies. Similarly, Christian Friends of Israel is in touch with many of the Holocaust survivors living in Israel, visiting them and helping to provide for their needs. I commend both these charities to you. 3,000 years ago, in what we call today Psalm 102, the psalmist wrote a description of the Holocaust. Reading from verse 3. For my days vanish like smoke, my bones burn like glowing embers. My heart is blighted and withered like grass. I forget to eat my food. Because of my loud groaning, I am reduced to skin and bones. I am like a desert owl, like an owl among the ruins. I lie awake. I have become like a bird alone on a roof. All day long my enemies taunt me. Those who rail against me use my name as a curse. For I eat ashes as my food and mingle my drink with tears because of your great wrath. For you have taken me up and thrown me aside. My days are like the evening shadow. I wither away like grass. But the psalm does not end there. It goes on to prophesy what we have just sung in Hatikvah, the rebirth of the state of Israel. From verse 12. But you, O Lord, sit enthroned forever. Your renown endures through all generations. You will arise and have compassion on Zion, for it is time to show favour to her. The appointed time has come. For her stones are dear to your servants. Her very dust moves them to pity. The nations will fear the name of the Lord. All the kings of the earth will revere your glory. For the Lord will rebuild Zion and appear in his glory. He will respond to the prayer of the destitute. He will not despise their plea. Let this be written for a future generation, that a people not yet created may praise the Lord. We are that future generation who are witnessing the fulfillment of this and other scriptures. May that encourage us all during the coming year. Thank you so much for joining us in this act of remembrance. Shalom and God bless.